What's this? Evil containment! What's this? Attack!
If I told you that the strongest techniques in all of Dragon Ball are from way back in the original series, you might think that I'm going a bit crazy. Or maybe that even Goku's Kamehameha or the Super Spirit Bomb are nothing compared to some of the things done by characters no stronger than a Cyberman. It's no secret that Dragon Ball got its start with stories heavily involving mysticism and Eastern mythos, and along with that came magic. And though modern Dragon Ball focuses almost entirely on its ki system, with Super aiming a particular focus toward intense energy control, these elements of magic still exist and have populated the series since its very first episodes. Even if we don't see it often these days, magic in Dragon Ball can do some pretty insane things, like creating something from nothing, sealing away enemies indefinitely despite massive power differences, and even creating life. So let's take a look at some of these underutilized techniques to see just how powerful they can be, and just how important magic has been to the Dragon Ball series. Firstly, let's start by distinguishing what I mean by magic in Dragon Ball. On one hand, ki is something that everyone from Beerus to Videl can harness. From powerful beams and blasts to flight to sensing the energy of those around you, ki is the energy that binds the Dragon Ball universe, kinda like chakra from Naruto or the Force from Star Wars. Ki is heavily tied to overall power. Having either a larger pool of or more precise control over your ki are the main ways to increase strength, speed, and durability.
When he was in the heat of battle, he was free of tension in both body and mind, and remained totally relaxed till the moment he attacked.
Aside from ki, there are a few other forms of energy to separate, like the spirit energy that the people of Yardrat talk about, responsible for things like instant transmission and spirit fission, and destroyer energy, a distinct form of energy that only gods of destruction and their trainees have access to. But apart from these energies, over the course of the series from early episodes of the original Dragon Ball all the way to the most recent arcs of Super, we've seen techniques that don't quite fit in with the rest, like materializing objects, manipulating time, and either draining or rejuvenating life essences. Though magic is used more liberally back in the original series, from what we've seen since, it's reasonable to assume that much of Dragon Ball's magic is some sort of divine power. Attendants and gods seem to all get access to magical abilities, like the Kai's version of instant transmission, materializing things like clothes and structures, or as we've seen Whis do, manipulate time on large scales. This would also explain why gods of destruction, despite being deities themselves, don't seem to get access to the same abilities quite as easily, given it's heavily implied that all destroyers are just mortals trained by angels to become divine beings. Then it makes sense why the majority of the magic we see in Z onward comes from the divine, like Whis, Shin, and Mr. Popo. But what about the other magic we see? How does that fit in? The bulk of the rest of the magic that we see in the series comes from Namekians. Dende's healing, Piccolo's clothes materialization, and even the Elder Guru's potential unlock, which bears striking resemblance to the Elder Kai's potential unleash. This is because, as I've explained in a previous video, Namekians are very likely descendants of the dragon god Zalama, the being who created the Super Dragon Balls. There are a few pieces of evidence that point towards Zalama being the original Namekian, which you can learn about in my video on it, but another point in favor of the theory is the Namekian's proclivity for magic. On top of this, we of course can't forget about the Dragon Balls, which are obviously capable of a number of magical abilities like resurrection,
I wish for Frieza! Bring him back to life!
teleportation,
Once I've been resurrected, have me transported directly to where you are on planet Namek.
and again, potential unlocks, but this time even closer to the Elder Kai's potential unleash technique, which we see in Superhero when, like what happened with Gohan,
Hey, are you sleeping, Elder Kai?
Piccolo's potential was unlocked and then given a bit extra.
All you had was a bit extra.
So if we count Namekians as divine descendants, what's left? Majins like Buu, of course, can use magic, given they are beings created from magic, and Buu specifically absorbed Kais on top of that. Demons like Deborah use magic because, as stated, the demon realm is heavily based on magic, and obviously demons have some sort of divine implication. So that leaves humans and other mortals. While these don't quite fit in as divine, we know that in Dragon Ball, mortals are more than capable of learning divine techniques. For example, Goku using Ultra Instinct or Hakai against Zamasu. Some may just be born with the power, like Babidi or Moro, who come from races we don't know much about. Otherwise, we can assume that through intense training, meditation, and reflection, that mortals can achieve divine powers. We clearly see Goku and Vegeta do it, but with someone like Master Roshi, who has lived far past the normal human lifespan, we also see him gain access to things like the Mafuba, Hypnosis, and Lightning Shock.
Surprise attack!
In Hindu philosophy, there's a sect called Advaita Vedanta. Tied tightly with the concept of non-dualism, this philosophy posits that the world we see around us is not the world as it truly is, only the world as we perceive it through our senses. If you've seen my previous videos, you might remember me talking about something similar in Lacan's theory of the real. Basically, the idea is that Brahman, we'll just say this is their version of true reality, is all that really exists. That the world as we see it is an illusion, and underlying everything is Brahman. The goal of Advaita Vedanta, as it were, is to achieve liberation, or moksha, from the cycle of rebirth, samsara. This is done through a sort of enlightenment, a realization of Brahman and of Atman, yourself as an eternal essence, sort of like a soul that exists through samsara across multiple lifetimes. To tie back into Dragon Ball, you can achieve realization of these two things while living, and in turn become liberated from the cycle of rebirth. In other words, achieve immortality, just like Master Roshi. So it's possible that Roshi has reached some form of enlightenment, a realization that he and the ocean and the stars and the gods are no different. That within Brahman, I am you and you are me, and with that God is me, and this is the ultimate reality. This connection with the gods, while not giving him everything that the gods may have, for example, we haven't seen Roshi with God Ki, may be responsible for his ability to use magical or divine techniques, and in turn teach them to others. This could also hint to why, in the manga, he was the one to teach Goku the final lesson he needed to achieve Ultra Instinct in the Tournament of Power, another ability stated to be a technique of the gods.
But Goku is a mortal being, and that is an extremely elite level of power, difficult for even the highest gods to reach.
The same could go for Roshi's sister, Fortune Teller Baba, who also has a very close connection to Otherworld. Mortals becoming gods or realizing they're no different is pretty consistent across the series, and goes hand in hand with what I mentioned earlier in how mortals are chosen and trained by angels to become destroyers. So, a few mortals can do magic too, and it's actually quite striking the similarities between the limited mortal versions of certain abilities and the divine ones that seem to come naturally. For example, we see mortals use sealing techniques, and we know Beerus has done it. We see Goku use instant transmission, but Shin can do it better. We see Piccolo materialize clothes, and we see Shin materialize giant cubes of Kachin. All of these techniques seem to be lesser imitations or imperfect versions of the techniques done by deities. And this realization that magic is a well of godly abilities could help to explain why its techniques are so powerful. In fact, far more powerful than anything else in the entire series. Over the course of Dragon Ball, we've seen some incredible abilities. Even the basics like a Kamehameha, bolstered by the strength and control of our heroes, can be powerful enough to shatter through dimensions.
What the?
But above all of these is magic. Of course, we have things on the low end, like creating clothes from thin air, or flying or teleporting, but we also have things like Mr. Popo creating life from nothing, or Moro using planets themselves as weapons. But what exactly makes magic so strong? The true secret behind its power is that in many circumstances, magic can completely disregard the power of its user, and the power of its target, something incredibly rare for Dragon Ball techniques. Take, for example, Babidi, a very weak creature with almost no real ki, meaning no strength, speed, or durability to speak of, and yet he's capable of creating a shield that can tank a blast from Majin Buu, who was the most feared creature in the universe at the time, far eclipsing the power of all of our heroes up to that point. A blast strong enough to take down Majin boosted Vegeta, and Babidi along with his shield don't even receive a single scratch. On the other hand, we have techniques like the Mafuba or Evil Containment Wave. In the Tournament of Power, we get to see Roshi, whose power now pales in comparison to most of our main roster, seal away enemies with Evil Containment, despite the massive power gap. Most surprisingly, Roshi's Mafuba, after reflected by Frost, was able to seal away even Vegeta, who eclipses both of them in strength to an absurd degree. These aren't the only times, though, that this is the case for Magic's ability to overcome large power differences. We also have Moro using his drain power on Goku and Vegeta back at the start of the arc when he was pretty much just a shriveled old husk. And the Mafuba again back in the Future Trunks arc, where Trunks, who had just learned the technique, crucially keep in mind that he had achieved Super Saiyan Rage by now, so he has access to God Ki, is able to seal away Zamasu, an actual immortal god, though he did manage to get out because they didn't have to seal with them. This example doesn't involve a power gap, as Future Trunks is stronger than base Zamasu on his own, but it shows the value of magic in situations where enemies can't be taken out by normal means. No matter how strong the heroes were, they had no chance of finishing off an immortal Zamasu, but the Mafuba was capable of sealing him away. Not only this, but it's also capable of sealing him away despite his access to the Kai Kai teleportation technique, meaning that it presumably nullifies other divine techniques in some sense. So not only can magic overpower normal mortal powers like Ki, it also can be advantageous against other divine techniques. This is what truly makes magic so terrifying in Dragon Ball. It can't be overpowered whether by mortals or gods. But with that said, magic does have its limits.
Come to think of it, I actually don't know how to fly. What?
Except the limit is more magic. For example, the Grand Supreme Kai is able to seal away Moro's magic using a technique of his own, the Kai Kai Mataru. Magic is also responsible for and goes hand in hand with the most important item in the entire series, the Dragon Balls.
Eternal Shenron! By your name, I now summon you forth!
Their creation and upgrading seem to be via magic. And the wishes, granted by dragon gods, also tie in closely with the magical abilities we've seen elsewhere, like healing, teleportation, and resurrection. Though the dragon's abilities are often limited by the power of their Namekian creator, some Dragon Balls, like those found on planet Cereal, are capable of granting wishes regardless of their creator's personal power. For example, Granola's wish to become the strongest in the universe, at the cost of almost all of his remaining lifespan. It's also worth noting that this power boost not only gave Granola the key power of someone like Goku or Vegeta, it also granted him divine abilities like destruction, and even, yes, magical abilities akin to Moro's planetary attacks and shields that look more than similar to Babidi's from all the way back in Z. Techniques he used to overpower even an ultra ego boosted Vegeta. So not only can Dragon Balls do things like unleashing one's power in the case of Orange Piccolo, they can also grant you magical abilities that can, in turn, help you overpower enemies far beyond yourself.
Well now, thank you, Shenron. That little extra went a long way.
Now that I've spoken about some of the strongest instances of magic in Dragon Ball, there's one elephant in the room left to address.
The fact is, we used to have 18 universes instead of only 12.
Zeno's erasure technique certainly is not one derived from Ki. So, is it magic? If we do count it as magic, that means magic is capable of instant erasure of all of existence, which would easily make it the most powerful ability, well, ever. Originally, I thought maybe this is a racial ability, as Zeno is the only one capable of performing it, but then I realized the Grand Minister is also capable of a type of erasure, seen when he erases Maris from existence. Along with that, though slightly different, Destroyers seem to get some sort of erasure with Hakai. This leads me to the idea that erasure, or at least some form of it, is a divine technique learnable by other divine beings. So is it magic, or is it something else? It lines up well with the rest of the things I've laid out, but something just doesn't feel right about including it alongside things like turning people into carrots when you touch them. So you can decide on that one for yourself. Though I will add that if we accept the Dragon Balls are a source of magic and the Super Dragon Balls are just Zalamo's version of them, then it follows that we also have magical items capable of doing literally anything, including reversing Zeno's erasure, meaning that the true power of magic in Dragon Ball is boundless. With that being said, I've mentioned quite a few instances of magic being used throughout the series, but I've also left a lot out. So now that we understand what magic is in Dragon Ball and how powerful it can be, let's take a look back at some of the most interesting forms of magic used throughout the series. I won't talk about every usage of magic through the series, but let's start at the beginning, with one of the most underrated abilities in the whole show. Monster Carrot's transmutation ability to instantly transform anyone into a carrot just by touching them.
You touched me.
This magical ability is not shown to have any sort of power requirement or limitation. It's possible, given its Dragon Ball, that you could just resist the technique if you were substantially stronger than the user, but based on the fact that Vegito, who is a result of a fusion via a divine source, is the only character who's been seen capable of resisting transmutation in this way, along with the fact that other magical techniques disregard the power of its user and target, it seems unlikely it has these limitations. This means, had Goku been touched by Monster Carrot, the series could have ended within its first 10 episodes. And the heroes really should have considered training up the boss rabbit for the Tournament of Power.
Ooh, tough break. You're on your own, kid. It's just you and the rabbits now.
After this, as I briefly touched on a moment ago, stuff like Boo's chocolate beam also have a transmutation effect that seem to not be limited by power differences. The beam itself can be stopped by a stronger beam, as we see in the case of Fat Boo versus Evil Boo, but once the beam hits you, you're turning into sweets one way or another. Speaking of Boo, one of the most feared creatures in the 7th universe, he is made out of magic. In fact, they made Boo so powerful as an endgame boss that he has to be specifically removed from the roster for big events, otherwise he would remove all tension, like the Universe 6 tournament and the Tournament of Power.
We couldn't do anything about it! Once Boo falls asleep, there's no waking him up!
Imagine Universe 7's strategy being to feed opponents into Boo's absorption, where he would hold them without killing them, increasing his power until he's strong enough to take out Jiren. Anyway, his magical body gives him the ability of near immortality through regeneration.
What are you? Immortal?
Being able to regen not only from any piece of his body, which he can rip off and throw around at will, but also from the smoke that comes off when pieces of his body are incinerated. He can also, as I just mentioned, absorb other beings into his own and hold them in stasis, increasing his own power, intelligence, and range of abilities. And, despite all of these powers and his incredible strength that rivaled Super Saiyan 3 Goku, Boo was able to be sealed away by magic. Sealing techniques in Dragon Ball are surprisingly common and some of the most powerful forms of magic in the series. I've mentioned a few in the form of the Evil Containment Wave and the magical sealing technique of the Grand Supreme Kai, but we also have Beerus using a version of the technique to seal the Elder Kai in the Z-Sword.
The truth is that he's the one who trapped me inside the Z-Sword.
Again, a powerful divine being capable of instant teleportation to anywhere in the universe and also to outside the universe to Zeno's palace, and he still can't escape. To this day, there doesn't seem to be any way to escape a proper sealing technique from within it, not for the Elder Kai, Zamasu, Boo, or even Vegeta. Next up is materialization. We see it most often with Piccolo and his clothes materialization beam, but it can be used offensively too, and to great success. For instance with Gas and his materialized weapons and objects. Axes, spears, heavy cube weights. These creations by Gas seem to be unique magical materializations instead of ki-based weapons used by the likes of Vegito and Fused Zamasu. And while we're on the topic of creating something from nothing, some of the most impressive feats of magical ability come from none other than Mr. Popo.
Hi!
Hi.
Not only is he able to do things like swallowing a whole Kamehameha from Goku, he can also rejuvenate living things instantly, and in the case of the clone version of Goku, can even create life from inanimate objects, a technique only otherwise seen from the Kai. I already spoke briefly earlier about Moro's magical ability to use planet's energy as weapons, on top of his ability to sense when he's being watched via ki detection, as well as the Kai's teleportation ability and Whis' ability to turn back time. So to finish off, I want to rank the top 5 magical abilities, not only by how much damage they can do, but how useful they are and how powerful they are in a more general sense. And we'll do weakest at 5, strongest at 1. Firstly, rank 5 is materialization. Being able to create matter out of nothing is pretty insane, and it needs to be on here somewhere. It can be used defensively by creating walls, offensively by creating weapons, or just in everyday life like materializing a sick new fit to go out with the boys. Next, at 4, it has to be sealing techniques like the Mafuba. Though it can be redirected, the fact that once you're hit by it, or in other cases like whatever Beerus did to the Elder Kai or the spell Bibbidi used on Boo, you just cannot escape it by any means. Once you're in, you're stuck forever unless someone outside helps you. There aren't really any other techniques like this besides complete existence erasure, and it's basically the only way for the heroes to deal with foes like immortal Zamasu or any other immortal beings that may pop up in the future. So in that way, it's invaluable. Third place goes to time alteration. Being able to turn back time and reverse disasters like what Whis did for Goku and Earth is also invaluable. In a universe where at any time one stray blast can destroy everything you love, being able to have a do-over every now and then is absolutely necessary. There's a reason why tampering with time is against the rules and primes you for destruction by a destroyer god. It's very powerful and can be very dangerous, but also very useful. Second is creation, or the power to create life. I mean, this one is pretty self-explanatory. Where would we be without this? We literally would not exist. Though the Kais make it kind of boring, stuff like Mr. Popo's ability to create a living automaton with only one hair that is equal in strength to the real thing is kind of insane. Imagine if he pulled out this ability again, though he'd have trouble against Nappa, Frieza, Cell, Boo. I wonder if that's why none of the villains ever have hair. Anyway, number 1 is, of course, the Super Dragon Balls. Kind of anticlimactic, I suppose, but when you have wish orbs in your series that can, well, literally do anything, they're probably going to be on the top of, well, every list. Given they can even undo Zeno's work in erasing multiple universes, they're probably a good thing to have around, just in case. And that's my list. Feel free to leave your own down below if you want to. It's a bit nebulous which techniques are necessarily the strongest, and depends on if you include things like Zeno's erasure, but whatever you decide, it's undoubtable that magic is one of, if not the most tremendous source of power in Dragon Ball. Despite moving away from some of its more mystic elements during Z and Super, Dragon Ball still retains its own air of magic and mystery, which is part of what makes the series so compelling. It's not just stronger and stronger beams and muscles, it to this day ties in elements of magic that we still don't fully understand. And hopefully they explore this even more with the release of Daima, or if you're watching this after Daima has come out, hopefully they didn't contradict everything I said here. Thanks for watching, join the Discord.